Few more people are joining. Okay, Dr. Lopez.
Si necesita interpretación en español, haga clic en el botón de abajo que dice español.
A few more participants that just joined us. Okay, are we ready to begin? Okay.
Good.
All right. So welcome to the 2021-2022 Transition Webinar Series hosted by the Nassau-Boces Department of Special Education. We thank the Nassau-Boces Board of Education for supporting this initiative. My name is Heather Sofer. I'm a principal at the Robert Williams School at Nassau-Boces. Thank you so much for joining us. The purpose of these webinars is to provide information that is important for families when students are preparing to leave school and enter adulthood. This webinar will run about 1 hour. If you have any questions during the presentation, we invite you to type your question into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be addressed following the presentation as time allows. I know that some people did already submit some questions, so if your question is not answered, please submit it again. If your question is of personal nature, please feel free to leave your contact information and tonight's presenter will contact you individually. Tonight's webinar is on the topic of college planning, services for students with disabilities. This event will be recorded and posted on the Nassau-Boces website, along with any documents provided by the speakers. Our speakers tonight are Julie Yindra, the Director of Student Access Services from Hofstra University, and Gina Esposito Sales, Counselor at the Center for Students with Disabilities at Nassau Community College. Welcome. Tonight, our speakers will review how students entering college may access accommodations and will highlight issues that affect the decision to do so, as well as other aspects of college life. It is with pleasure that I introduce you to Ms. Yindra and Ms. Sales.
Hello.
Hi, everyone. Gina, do you want me to let you start off?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Gina Sales. I'm a counselor in the Center for Students with Disabilities at Nassau Community College. Just a little bit about Nassau. We are a degree-seeking community college, so we offer associate degree programs as well as some certificate programs and programs of the applied sciences so that students could then go on for employment. So lots of opportunities. We have under the Student Personnel Services Department, our Center for Students with Disabilities. It's in the same department as also psychological counseling, student activities, transfer counseling, and career and job placement. The Center for Students with Disabilities offers an assigned counselor to any student that registers with our office as a student with a documented disability, as well as temporary or a brief disability due to a surgery. So we will provide accommodations and support to any student that identifies himself as having need. Our program offers the academic counseling, some personal counseling, advocacy, as well as a tutoring center, and a new help center as well for other services as far, time management skills, test anxiety, things like that. And we also have a testing center where students can take their exams with their accommodations. Tonight, Julie and I will talk about the transition and how such services could be available to your children at the college level, and of course the differences between high school and college. So that's my overview about Nassau. The biggest thing that I'm going to be saying before we join our presentations together is that at Nassau, And like other schools as well, the student must self-identify. So as your child is leaving the high school setting, it is important that they learn some self-advocacy skills so that they feel comfortable asking for this help and support, unlike in the high school where it's kind of just provided to them because they're coming from such a school that knows all about them. So I will leave it to you, Julie, to share a little bit about Hofstra, and then we can present together.
Awesome, fantastic. So my name, as Heather said, is Julie Indra, and I'm the Director of Student Access Services at Hofstra. We are a university, so we offer both 4-year bachelor's degrees in a variety of fields, as well as a multitude of graduate programs, including the School of Nursing, the medical school, and the Hofstra Law School. We are a little bit different in several ways from Nassau Community College. Nassau Community College is an open admission university. Hofstra is selective, so you do need to apply, submit a transcript and a variety of other pieces of information in order to be admitted to the university. So it's a little bit different, but for both of us, we work with students who, many of them for the first time in their lives, are transitioning to the adult role, as Gina said, of having to talk about themselves and advocate for themselves and determine when they need to go and ask for help and how to ask for help and what kind of help to ask for. So I want to talk a little bit just about some background here. I work in higher education and have been doing that for about 20 years. And every year I have at least one family that comes in and says, here is my son's IEP. Are you the person who's going to implement my son's IEP? Because he's in special education. And so there are certain things that he needs to be different. And so the first thing that we need to establish in the difference between the K-12 system, the public school system and college or university, is that there's no special education in college or university, right? So the law that governs special education, IDEA, right? The law that says that every child with a disability is entitled to a free and appropriate public education, that IDEA is education law. But that law stops being in effect when the student graduates from high school and moves on to the college environment. So there's no special education, there's no IEPs, there's no changing the curriculum, there's no changing the requirements for a student with a disability. If you apply to Hofstra as a student with a disability, you need to meet the same criteria and standards as a student who doesn't have a disability. And if you major in chemistry, you have to take the same classes and get the same grades as students that don't have disabilities. But what does take over when you transition to college is the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehab Act. And those, unlike IDEA, those are not education legislation. They are civil rights laws. They are non-discrimination laws. They don't say that we have to provide an education that is appropriate for a particular student. What they say is every college and university has to have practices that guarantee that they're not discriminating against a person based solely on a disability that they may have. So these laws require equal access, equal opportunity, right? So we have to prove that we are providing what we call accommodations and services that will ensure that the disability that the student has is not a roadblock to educational opportunity. So that's the first thing, is that the laws that govern what Gina and I do differ. Now, there's something else that is different. In public school, it's the responsibility of the school to find and evaluate and place students in appropriate educational settings and seek them out and look for students who may need some extra help or may need some different services. When you graduate from high school and go to college, you as the student and the student's family are the ones who are responsible for what we call disclosure. You need to approach the college or university and say, I am a student who's coming to Nassau Community College next semester, and I have a disability, and I need certain accommodations in order to level the playing field. And here's all of my paperwork to justify the services that they need. So Gina, can you talk a little bit more in some detail about the kind of documentation and paperwork that students need to be providing at Nassau Community College?
Sure. Thank you. So as Julie's explaining, his first step, of course, is identifying yourself as one with a disability. So at Nassau, what we ask, of course, is that first you apply to the college. We are an open enrollment. So once you apply, you got the ball rolling and you are accepted. We ask that you send in an application that you can get on our website. It's application that requests in which you're requesting services from CSD. And with that, you would send in either the latest IEP, the psychological evaluation, if you have a copy of that. If it's a medical diagnosis, medical disability, we ask to have proof of that from a physician. At Nassau, we ask for documentation that's within 3 years, but we do accept documentation that may be a little older. Other schools and universities might require a certain time frame in which the documentation was created. So we sometimes run into that problem when students transfer from Nassau. So you do want to make sure that in this last year of high school, when you're getting documentation updated and closed out and stuff, that you do get the last copy of that to share with the school in which your child may be looking to go to. Yeah, so you would provide that to us. Important piece, very important piece, and I know Hofstra shares the same take, is the psychological evaluation. That gives a nice overview of everything that is going on with the individual, as well as social, emotional overview, and IQ scores. So.
Yeah, I think we have similar requirements at Hofstra, but there's a couple things that have been happening lately that have caused us to sort of look at our documentation requirements a little bit differently. And one of those is that, students who are in special education are required to receive what's called a triennial evaluation. Every 3 years, there's a reevaluation process where the student, they're evaluated to determine their current level of functioning, to determine their current set of specific needs for supports, and their continued eligibility for special education services. It used to be that when those triennial evaluations were done, they would redo all of that psychological testing, right? The IQ testing and all that kind of thing with the triennial evaluation. But lots and lots of schools over the years have relaxed those requirements, and they know they have to do a triennial evaluation, but that evaluation may not include a complete psychoeducational evaluation all over again. So we've started to, think about, as long as the profile and the testing tells us what we need about the students' learning, about their challenges, about their deficits, about their strengths, right? As long as it's comprehensive, sometimes we're able to consider older documentation, particularly knowing that schools may not be doing that complete evaluation on a triennial basis anymore. The other thing in more recent years even is COVID, right? When COVID hit, a lot of special education services for a lot of kids around the country sort of came to a halt, right? So a lot of that evaluation was not being done. So we're now dealing at Hofstra with students who are entering college, who have spent the bulk of their high school years going to school remotely or in a hybrid situation, and many of those students didn't get the same level of special education services that they may have gotten if it weren't for COVID. So we're taking all of those things into consideration. But I actually just recently had a student who came into our office at the beginning of the spring semester after the holiday, after having the fall semester, thinking that they were going to be getting their accommodations and assuming that the high school was sending all of those records automatically. And what you have to know about those records, about those psychoeducationals and the disability related documentation, the 504 plans and the IEPs and all of that, that information is considered confidential, and it is not, in fact, automatically sent. A student needs to make sure that they request of their high school guidance counselor or special education coordinator or whoever it is at their high school that maintains those records. They often need to be the ones to say, I'm going to Hofstra in the fall. Can you please send all of my disability related records to Julie Indra or to Gina Sales or whoever that is, because those records are not being sent without the student's consent and without the student requesting that specifically. So that's really important to understand, is that that doesn't happen automatically, right? There are other changes that occur when you enter the college environment. And one of them that's really important, and I'm going to let Gina talk about this for a few minutes, and then I'm going to tag team with her. And that is the changing role of the parent versus the student. So can you talk a little bit, Gina, about what the expectations are when the student enters the college environment and how the parental role will begin to change?
Absolutely, yes. So what we love to say is that when you step foot on the college campus, you're going to be treated as an adult. So that huge break between high school and setting foot on the college campus is an opportunity for you to reevaluate. If there's any students on the call tonight, to reevaluate, how you see yourself as an adult in stepping foot into college. We really do advocate for the student, direct our conversation to the student, speak to the student. We want communication from the student, whether it's a phone call requesting an appointment or an email. We really want it from the student to know that they're the person we're servicing. They're the individual that we are going to be working with. They're the person that's sitting in the classroom doing the work, taking the exams, having issues, needing support. So when we first start to see students for their initial conversation about the accommodations or scheduling classes, if a parent wishes to be there, that is fine if the student is comfortable and approving of that. And then moving forward, we do say that communication between our office and other faculty members and the parent is really not acceptable. It's up to the student to allow for the parent to be in on a call, to be present during a meeting. We have guidelines. We have actually a law, the FERPA law, in which we do have the ability to say we cannot disclose that information.
And that's a really important thing to remember. FERPA. FERPA is a federal law that says that any adult, meaning 18, right, has the right to have all of their records in the college environment be confidential and not be shared by the university with anyone without the student's express consent, including parents, which a lot of parents they look at that and they say, but wait a minute, I can't call up and ask about my student's bills and I'm paying the bills, right? And yes, that is true. However, very, very important piece of information. Most colleges and universities will talk to students and with families about this. There is a FERPA waiver form that colleges and universities will have students fill out to give specific access to certain types of information to specific individuals. So Johnny might fill out a FERPA form and say, if my mother or my father call and here's their names, these are the things that I give you permission as the university to share with them. Sometimes colleges and universities will talk about this during summer orientations, or, you know, when students are coming to visit, when they've been accepted to the university. And sometimes colleges and universities, not at Hofstra, but before I went to work at Hofstra, I worked at a small college, and we had summer orientation for freshmen, and we would sit them all in the auditorium next to their parents and say, so there's this thing called a FERPA form, and we're going to pass them out, right? And so kind of a chance for parents and students to have the conversation about that FERPA form while they're all in the same room together, right? But there's something else that I want to say, because aside from the federal law respecting the confidentiality of the adult and the autonomy of the adult, there's something else at play for me in the role that I have working with students with disabilities. We all know that it's difficult to let go of your students as they get older. Sometimes it's even harder if your student has a disability and you are worried about whether or not they're ready, about whether or not they can handle it, about whether or not, you know, they know what to do if they fall over and make a mistake. So, you know, when I think about the FERPA rule and the autonomy that I'm trying to foster for students, here's my take on this. What I believe about the students' growth during the college years, it comes from an old motto from the disability rights movement, which is nothing about us without us. So I want parent involvement. I want to communicate with parents. I want the assistance from parents that sometimes we need in order to make sure that our students are staying on track, right? If a student's not going to class, I don't have the ability to say something like, so we're going to take the car away until those grades come up, but you all do, right? So it's important that we consider each other partners in this endeavor. But here's what's going to happen. If you call my office and say, oh my God, I have been texting my son every day and he's not returning my text, and I don't know what's going on, and I don't know if he's going to class, and I don't know if he's staying in bed all day or what's happening, please find out if everything's going okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, thank you very much for calling. I'm going to look into this, and then I'm going to get back to you. And then I'm going to poke around and see what I can find out about what's going on with your student. Maybe I have an opportunity to communicate with professors and see, has the student been going to class? Are there any red flags? Are there any major things that you think we need to be aware of? And then I'm going to call the student in and talk to the student and say, so how's it going? How are your classes? You getting along with your roommate? You taking good care of yourself? You getting enough to eat? And then I'm going to say, so listen, your parents are calling, and we need to kind of fill them in. So I'll have a conversation with the student about what we want to talk to mom or dad about. And then I will call with your student in my office, and we'll put the speakerphone on, and we will call and speak to you and fill you in on what we feel is important for you to know about what's happening with your student. So I want that partnership, but I want it with respect to the student's role in the process. My sense is it's never a good idea to have conversations behind the student's back. Right. I see a question. And it says, what constitutes a disability for college purposes? Specifically, is there something equivalent to other health? Oh, okay. This is a really good question. All right. There is no such disability as other health impaired. Other health impaired is a category used by special education law. There are 13 categories that 13 categories of disability that make a student eligible for services. And there's a whole range of them, but those categories do not speak to every single disability that's out there, right? There's thousands and thousands of different kinds of mental health concerns and learning challenges. There's all kinds of things. And so if you are being given accommodations under the category of other health impaired, what we're going to say is, what is the condition that made you eligible to be served under that category? Is it ADHD? Right? Is it a chronic health impairment? Is it fibromyalgia or Crohn's disease or generalized anxiety disorder, right? So what makes you eligible for services in college has nothing to do with whether or not you got special education services in the K-12 system. It has to do with, do you have a condition that is considered a potential impediment to your full inclusion and participation in the college environment? So it can be a wide range of things. And like Gina said, if it's a medical condition, the documentation that we actually want is a letter from the doctor who treats you for that condition, giving us a clear picture of how that condition is an impediment to you potentially in the classroom or outside the classroom. Because the other thing, and not necessarily the case at Gina's institution, but the other thing that you have to consider when transitioning to college is many of those colleges are residential. So not only do you have to worry about what accommodations that you need in the classroom, but what accommodations might you need in the residence hall or in the dining hall? Do you have significant allergies to certain foods that you need to stay away from? Or do you have airborne allergy issues? Or do you have a chronic medical condition that is going to be a problem for you at night, right? So there's all kinds of additional layers of things to consider. But the primary answer to that question is having a disability and receiving special education are two totally different things. They often overlap. The other thing I want to talk about is there are accommodations that students might be receiving in high school that may not necessarily be appropriate. The accommodations that you receive in college may look different from the accommodations that you received in high school. So Gina, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the common accommodations that students receive in community college?
Thank you. And I had a thought too about the last question that you were just addressing. So going back to the appropriate documentation that one would send in that identifies what the disability is, just to really express too that many students come through requesting services and they don't even know what their disability is. Sadly, we have this CSD application, and it says what's your disability, and students will write extra time. So to have these conversations about, the first step is advocating for yourself and understanding what your needs are. We often see this other health impairment coming from the high schools when it's actually maybe autism or ADHD. So sometimes I think it's also what the school might be using to identify things. So really just getting down to the root of what the issue is, what the disability is, could be so helpful for your child. So the documentation is just a baseline for us to get to know the student a little better, see what they were getting in the years before as far as accommodations of extra time or a reader or scribe. But a lot of our actually assigning accommodations for students to utilize in their either face-to-face class or remote or online classes is through a conversation that we're going to have with the student. So the question in the chat is, what is an accommodation? So right now, if a student has an IEP or a 504, they may be receiving extra time on exams. They may be receiving a reader during an exam. They may be receiving a scribe, someone might write for them. They might receive in large print or a copy of class notes. So a lot of these accommodations that students are getting in high school, I'm going to be frank for a minute, is a lot of hand holding, walking them through every step of the exam or every step of a class lecture or discussion that when we look at the accommodations that are appropriate at a college level, just because it's in the IEP from high school doesn't mean that it's going to translate over to the high school classroom. I'm sorry, the college classroom or the college exam. So we, the conversation with the student, sometimes you find, they have on their IEP, they're getting every accommodation under the sun. And then you say to the student, what do you really utilize? And they'll say, just extra time, just put extra time down on my form. So again, just having conversations with your children about what they see that they need, what they're going to need, what they're utilizing now, and how it might play out in college. So.
And what they need, their perception of what they need may change once they've had the first semester of courses, because part of the reason students don't really know what to ask for just yet sometimes is they know what they received in high school and what they needed in high school, but they don't really have a sense of what the demands are going to be in the college classroom or how that might be different. So they're not quite sure exactly what to ask for. So the other thing you need to know is there will be a baseline, right? And there will be the review of the documentation and a conversation with the student and a determination of what accommodations are appropriate. But the student can come back months later and say, I didn't ask for accommodations with regard to how I take notes in class, but now after sitting through college lectures for 4 months, I realize that I can't keep up taking notes and I need some kind of note-taking accommodation. So that process can be iterative and can change over time. And as the student is taking different types of classes that have, different requirements and different types of assessments, I have some students who come to me and say, I do fine with the time and a half for exams when I'm taking, short answer or multiple choice exams or whatever. But, those essay exams are killing me. And I really need more than time and a half. And so we might ask for some additional documentation and review that request and determine if it's legitimate to offer the student, a double time for essay exams when it's warranted. So we have to, understand that there's kind of an ongoing negotiation that's going on here, depending on what the student is experiencing. There are certain accommodations that I see all the time in high school IEPs and 504 plans that just are not appropriate in college courses. One of them that I see all the time is preferential seating, right? For those kids that have attentional challenges, you want them seated right up underneath the teacher so that there's minimal distraction and they can focus on what's being said. So,
or redirection.
yes.
That's another, yeah.
Right. The redirect, right. We don't, your professor is not going to be checking to make sure you're paying attention and repeating what they said if they notice that you're not paying attention. So what preferential seating means in college is you go to the class 10 minutes early and choose a seat in the front, right? So there's a lot more that is based on the student's own sense of self-determination, right? The student makes choices. The student with a disability has exactly the same rights as a student without a disability, including the right to make bad choices. Because one of the things that we know, Gina and I have been working with kids this age long enough to realize that one of the things we know about them is they make mistakes, right? They're going to make mistakes, but part of letting them grow into that adult person that you want them to be is understanding their mistakes and how to correct their mistakes and how to go back and get up and brush themselves off and do it again. Right? That's part of the growing up process and taking responsibility. I have students come into my office all the time and say things like, the professor doesn't like me. He gave me a D. And I just want to say, he didn't give you a D, you earned it, right? That's the grade that you earned. And sometimes that's a harsh lesson. I saw a question come along about the admission process. And I want to, at this time, say that Gina can speak about Nassau Community College and I can speak about Hofstra. But one of the things that we do know is that Federal law says that all colleges and universities have to provide reasonable accommodations, but every college or university gets to determine their own definition of what reasonable means. So you need to shop around. There will be an office that provides services for students with disabilities at every college or university. There will be a person who's responsible for that. But the scope and the depth of the services that are provided will vary greatly from school to school. So part of your investigation early on is, where are the schools that really provide the richness of service, right? The extra support services, the support groups and the tutoring and the writing center and the coordinated collaboration with the advising office and all those kinds of things that you really want to make sure that there's a net underneath your students. There's lots of places to look for those colleges that really do an excellent job of serving students with disabilities. You can Google if you want, 50 best colleges in the country for students with learning disabilities, and you get a pretty good list. You can Google the 20 best colleges for students that are wheelchair users, and you'll get a pretty good list. There are college guides, the Peterson Guide and K&W guide, that are like Barron's books, but they are specifically geared toward evaluating programs and services for students with disabilities at colleges around the country. So there's lots and lots of places to look. Gina, you look like you were about to say something. Did you have something to add?
No, I just wanted to address, it looks like there's some questions coming up in the chat that would be a great segue after shopping around at different schools and seeing, even going to open houses. I know we're having a lot of virtual open houses. Hofstra, are you back face-to-face open houses? I'm sure other schools are doing the same. So someone just asked, when is the right time to make contact with these colleges? So after shopping around, I know if I could just speak on behalf of Nassau, we ask that you identify yourself as one with a disability after applying. So when you apply to Nassau, you're going to be issued a student ID number. And we ask that after you get that NCC ID number, then you send your request with your documentation to our Center for Students with Disabilities. So as we are an open enrollment, so that means that everyone is accepted. But if you do not have SAT scores or ACT scores or certain regions cutoff scores or a certain grade in your final average of a reading, English, math type of a class, then you will be asked to take a placement test. And that's the first time that a student may be utilizing their accommodations. That could be the first test in which they're taking an exam at the college and want to have their extra time and a reader. So that addresses that question. And then there's
there's kind of a different nuance to that when you're applying to selective colleges, because there's a perception out there that colleges and universities are going to look differently at a student with a disability. So let me talk about that for just a minute, because there's a lot of concern out there. If my son or daughter discloses during the admission process, can they use that against them? So first of all, schools cannot ask if you have a disability or ask about your disability. They're not allowed to do that, okay? Second, they're not allowed, once you do disclose a disability, to use that as a reason not to accept you if you meet all of the other admission criteria, right? It's called discrimination, right? However, I kind of have a different attitude about this. I am all for upfront disclosure. I am all for going to visit colleges, knowing that one of the stops that you're going to make is an appointment with the person who does what I do. Because that, for a lot of you, should be part of what you are assessing when you're looking for the right fit for your son or daughter. Who runs that office? What is their philosophy? How hands-on are they? How open are they to student, direct student service? Some disability services offices are strictly for the purposes of evaluating the paperwork and granting the accommodations, and they're not like a full service operation, right? So you want to get a sense of who those people are, what kind of accommodations they provide, how are they provided, who's doing it, How open are they to working directly with students? Do they have the capacity to meet with students on a regular basis to help them out, right? So you want to be able to look at those things. And my feeling is, I don't know, maybe I just look at this differently from other people, but if you and your son or daughter are sitting, you've been to a tour and you're now sitting in the office of the admissions counselor talking about the college or university and talking about the student, and the student saying, you know, I was involved in extracurricular activities. If the student says, oh, and by the way, I have a learning disability and I need some accommodations, so I'd like to get some information from that office and maybe talk to them while I'm here today, if that's possible. If you get the rolling of the eyes or the sudden uncomfortable pause from the admissions counselor when you disclose that information, why do you want to go there? Why do you want to go someplace where you're not welcome? Right? So I believe in helping the students turn the table on this very, very often stressful situation of, I'm under a microscope and all these colleges are evaluating me and they're judging me and they're determining whether I'm good enough. I mean, when my nieces were going through the college admission process, I mean, they made themselves sick worrying about waiting for their notices from their colleges of choice. And what we have to do is say to students, stop thinking about the college is shopping for you, and start thinking about it as you are shopping for the right college, right? So you can go in there and sit down and say, I want to find out if you have the right services that meet my needs. And if I feel comfortable, and if I feel welcomed, and if I feel that I belong here, right? That's a really important thing. And yes, there are scholarships. First of all, private colleges and universities have all kinds of scholarships, merit scholarships, and a variety of scholarships available for all students. But in addition to that, there are often scholarships that are disability specific, right? So for instance, Hofstra just joined in partnership with the Craig Nielsen Foundation. The Craig Nielsen Foundation is a national foundation that funds all things related to spinal cord injury. And one of the things that they do is they have selected 16 or 17 colleges across the country, and Hofstra is one of them, where if you identify a student that's coming to Hofstra that has a spinal cord injury, the Craig Nielsen Foundation will provide a significant amount of financial support to support the student's needs. So there are, so you might want to look at CHAD, which is the National Organization for individuals with ADD and ADHD, the Learning Disability Association. Check with the advocacy organizations for your child's particular disability, their particular diagnosis. Very often you will find that there are scholarships that are designated for students with certain types of disabilities. It might require a little bit of digging around, but you can find them out there. So what have we not talked about, Gina?
I think we hit everything. Maybe just want to reiterate again that there's no special education classes at the college. That's a question I get a lot about. With the classes, will there be a special education type of class? So just to express that, every class offered at the college is open to any student as long as they have the correct placement or prerequisites. So there's no class in which a student is going to have a similar experience to either a BOCES classroom or a resource room setting. College is open for everyone.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. We've talked a little bit about this notion of fit, right? There's all different colleges and universities. There's open enrollment schools like where Gina works, and there's more selective colleges and universities. There are colleges and universities accommodations, but some colleges and universities provide what we would refer to as comprehensive support programs. might come with an additional fee or have a separate or additional admission process to go through. So it's really important for you and your son or your daughter and your college counselor in high school to be talking early on about what kind of support services do we think the student's going to need in order to be successful, right? And start shopping for schools who provide that level of. Sometimes it might be related to class size. You want a school where there's, 25 kids in a class instead of 300, right? That might be a very appropriate thing for lots of students. Sometimes you might want a very small college where the students are going to get lots of individualized attention from student affairs. Some might want a really in-depth counseling service that's available on the college campus, that they might decide that that's something that's really important to them. So take your time, start early. And what Gina said earlier about your students needing to know about themselves, if by the time your student is, if your student is college bound, by the time your student's in 9th or 10th grade, if they're not running their IEP meetings, or if they're not talking to their teachers about what accommodations they need, they should be, right? They should be the ones driving the bus so that they can practice that skill so that they're ready for that challenge when they get to college. And one of the questions is there support for students who struggle socially? Yes. I'll say something about this for just a moment. Many colleges and universities across the country are having this dialogue right now about an enormous shift in the needs of the students who are showing up at their doorstep. And many more students in this generation who really have difficulty with anxiety, who are suffering with lots of different kinds of mental health challenges like no generation before it. And so schools wanting to retain their students and provide the support services that keep their students, advancing forward, are building that kind of support on their campuses. If it doesn't exist already, it's in the works, because colleges are having that dialogue all over the country about what are we doing to support these students' needs. And so there's social groups, there's all kinds of, and if your student needs a little bit of extra time to cook before they're ready for jumping into that total independence, there are schools out there and institutions out there that provide really good summer, like jumpstart kind of programs. So summer opportunities to kind of get a feel for living in the dorm, taking a college class, getting used to self-advocating. So if your student needs a kind of a bridge to the college environment, those kind of support services are out there too. Your counselors can help you find those kinds of opportunities.
And just to speak on behalf of Nassau, especially because we're a commuter school where students can't dorm there, we really do take pride in our activities during the day and some at the evening, where we have an evening population of students that attend. So we have club hour. We have over 100 clubs in which students have been meeting in their clubs, even over the pandemic, meeting virtually. And we're happy to be offering stuff back face to face for that social need that we all have and desire.
One of the things that we do at Hofstra is we have 3 evening psychosocial groups that meet, facilitated by a staff member. And one of them is called Keep Calm and Carry On. And it's to help students who are experiencing significant anxiety in the college environment, help them develop coping strategies with one another. Because one of the things, as a person with a disability myself, one of the things that I've always found is one of the best resources for someone with a disability who's got a problem is another person with a disability who's had the same problem and found a solution. Right? So we have Keep Calm and Carry On. We have Social Network Live. We have these groups. So there's all kinds of things that are cropping up in college campuses, but it really requires that you do some serious investigation. Visit the colleges personally, if at all possible. If at all possible, talk to the person who does what I do and what Gina does when you go to visit, right? Because you really have to your son or daughter is going to call this place home. And they need to feel that they belong there and that they have the support system that they need in order to be comfortable there. There's a couple of questions that I saw about resource rooms. So we said there's no special education in college. So there is no such thing as a resource room where students that have disabilities go to get extra help. However, there's lots of rooms on college campuses where all students can go to get extra help, right? So there's tutoring centers where you can get content-based tutoring for a particular course. Many schools have writing centers or math learning centers where it's skill-based. So no matter what class you're taking, if you have a writing assignment and you need help, you can go to the writing center. So there's counseling centers. So we at Hofstra, we have what we call success advisors. So there's a department that's not mine that's called the Center for Academic Excellence, and there's success advisors, and students can go in and make an appointment and come in and say something like, I'm having difficulty managing my time and I need someone to help me work through some strategies. So there's all kinds of resources. The thing that I can't impress enough upon students as they get ready to go to college is the most important skill for a student, to me, the most important skill for a student with a disability to have to be successful in college is what I call help-seeking behavior. There's all kinds of resources out there. The students who do the best are the ones who take advantage of all of those resources. Does that make sense? All right. So what we want to do, I think, is as we're wrapping up, answer any other questions that come up that are related. And as Heather had said early on too, if your question is of a personal nature, I'm available, Gina's available, the staff at BOCES are available. They will make sure that if you have questions related to our specific institution or our specific programs, we are available to you. We definitely want to hear from people. We want to talk to people about the process because we know that it is a scary process for students and for their parents. So feel free to call on us if we can be of any assistance. So Heather, are there any other lingering questions out there that you've seen that we might be able to answer?
I don't think so. I think you covered all of the questions that I saw in the chat and even on the sidebar. So I think that you guys did a wonderful job. And as we're about to wrap up, if there are no other additional questions, oh wait, I think one is coming in right now. Let me just scroll down. Oh, I just want to thank you both. I think this has been a wealth of information and it has been, for me, even just listening in. So I hope everyone agrees that they left this presentation with their questions answered. Again, you can reach out for personal questions. This presentation will be is recorded and will be posted on the Nassau BOCES website. So please don't hesitate to look back. And I thank you both for your time and your wonderful insight. And this was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to tag team with you again, Gina.
Yes, likewise, Julie. Thank you.
Anytime.
Thanks.
Take care, y'all.
Yes. Good night.
Good night.
Everyone.